Hello and welcome to another episode of the Marc Medley Show. This evening's podcast, or today's podcast, is titled, Now is the Time for Us All to Speak Up and Speak Out. And what I mean by that is everything that we've been seeing up until this point that culminated last weekend in Charlottesville, when the hate groups such as the supremacists and the nationalists and the KKK made their appearance, in a grand way, if for lack of a better way, a better term, a better way of saying it, made a grand appearance. And I'm encouraged because everything that has happened since that time, because the president seems, even though he didn't say it, by his actions and what he didn't say and his outbursts, could lead one to believe that he's in support of those groups, regardless of how much he denies it or protests that he is not. So I'm encouraged that all the counter-protests that I saw in all the various cities, of everyone speaking up and speaking out. See, one of the things that made those groups work so many years ago was that you had so many people in various positions who were in cahoots with them. You had the judges and the police officers and the mayors and the governors and the other city officials that were all working along with them. But this is a different day. That is not occurring, so to speak, today. Because that's why you see the pullout of all these various groups. That's why you see so many groups pulling out. You see so many politicians that are speaking up and saying, we are not for this. This is not us. America is better than that. See, they weren't saying that in the 50s. They weren't saying that in the 40s. At least not enough. But see, in 2017, enough folks are saying it. The crowds in counter-protests are massive. That's a good sign. The number of organizations who pulled out of activities having anything to do with them, that's a good sign. The fact that many of the supremacists could not get rooms or hotels to hold their meetings in, that's a good sign. Now is the time for us all to speak up and speak out. Get in touch with your legislators. Get in touch with your congressmen. Get in touch with your senators. Get in touch with your local assembly, your state assembly, your state senators. Get in touch with all the representatives you can and let them know that this will not stand. In my last podcast, I talked a little bit about the 3 words for love, and that was agape, eros, and philia, with agape being the highest form. And that's what, at least in my mind, now I could be wrong, but at least in my mind, that seems like what I'm seeing here is all these various groups get together. They are taking a stand. And I know times have changed, because I remember years ago, back in the 90s, I used to teach a diversity course. And it was interesting the number of Caucasian young people who would come up to me and say, Mark, my dad was Archie Bunker. I grew up in a house that was just like the Bunker's house. My mother and father, or father in particular, had the same ideology and the same commentary, the same worldview as Archie Bunker. But I don't have that view. And that seems to be the view now. More of the young people who have come up, more of the young people who have grown up with the various races and sexual orientation and gender, more of the young people who have been exposed to other people and other cultures and people around the world, because that's the other thing. World travel is much more accessible now than it ever was. For one to look at the globe and to imagine that they would one day be there, whether it be Europe or China, whether it would be in Germany, Switzerland, Italy, London, France, China, the Caribbean. 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago, that was limited to a few, but more and more of our young people are getting out and seeing the world. That's another reason why they're exposed, and they know that some of this crap that people are talking is just that. It's crap. That whole Aryan nation or race, master gene, intelligence theory, that's flawed. As a matter of fact, my personal opinion, I think that's built more on feeling inferior than it really is about being superior. Because it takes someone with an inferior complex to have to feel that they need to get rid of somebody else in order for them to be the only folks around. So I am thrilled. I am happy. I am encouraged at what I'm seeing, but we have to keep it up. We cannot let off. We cannot let up on the pressure. We cannot let up. We must let the world continue to know that hate will not stand, that darkness will not stand, that we will be the light, that we will come forth and remove that darkness, that we will be the love that overrides that hate. I saw something today where the president or his daughter or both of them were spinning this. That was saying, well, protest is good. Maybe from protest is how we actually move forward. And there's a little bit of truth to that. That wasn't the design. And I'm sure when the president had his outburst the other day, he wasn't thinking about the good that could come from that. But just as I surfed the web and I looked in Boston and I looked in New Orleans and I looked in all these other cities that were having rallies, it did my heart good. And I'm going to make sure I can do everything I can through this podcast, through all my social media sites, through all my connections, my political connections, the folks that I know personally. I know some of my congressmen personally. I know my state senator personally. I know my assembly people personally. And I have no problem with expressing my views in terms of whatever we need to do to make sure this hatred does not stand. Because, see, again, 40, 50 years ago, we would go into a courtroom, know the person was guilty, and that jury would sit there and smile and smirk and let the perpetrator off, knowing good and well they had just lynched someone, or in the case of Emmett Till, that what they did to him, throwing him in the river and the shooting and all those various crimes that were going on then, that the juries, the judges, and everyone knew the perpetrator was guilty. And yet, as I said, they would smile and they would smirk and the person would go free. As a matter of fact, they would go back into their communities and brag about what they had done. So as I said, it is a wonderful sign to see so many people speaking out, speaking up, walking, demonstrating, putting out their flags against hatred, in support of love, in support of human beings, in support of the human race. Because truth be told, when all is said and done, that's the only race. Now, it may sound cliche, it may sound corny, it may sound whatever you may want to call it, but the truth of the matter is, it's the human race. Now, I'll tell you, you want to do the litmus test? I tell you what, go out to a cemetery. Go out to a cemetery and look at the various names on the headstones. And you will see so many different nationalities and names buried right next to each other or in the same area. Because, see, death is the great equalizer. And for the most part, folks don't have too much control unless they bought their plot in advance. And even with that, they don't have a whole lot of control over who is lying next to them in the cemetery or in the crypt. Even if they're in a mausoleum, even if they put them in a crypt, they're still next to someone else. And if you go and you read those names, They have all different kind of names and nationalities. So that very person or skin color or orientation you may have hated in life, you're laying next to in eternity. Because see, that's the great equalizer. Same thing if you were to go to a hospital. You don't have too much control, unless you get a private room, over who you're going to be rooming with. You don't know what race the person may be. I'm saying all that to say is, we are human beings. There is no such thing as any master race. There is the human race. So for anyone to try to perpetuate that theory or that image or that notion, they're wrong. They are wrong. So for those of you who don't buy into that, that's what I'm saying. For everyone who is not a part of a hate group, we must let the folks in the hate group know that it will not stand. They got away with it 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago, but they will not get away with it now. Keep up the fight. Keep up the good work. In each demonstration, may those who know that we're the human race overtake it. And it doesn't have to be overtaken with violence. See, that's the thing. Folks still get the violence thing mixed up. Just because you're counter-protesting does not necessarily mean it has to turn violent. Tough, but it can be done. We're doing it. America is looking, or heading in the direction of looking like the America that everyone knows. Regardless of age, regardless of color, regardless of race, that crowd of counter-protesters, they were all there. And they were letting them know that hate will not stand. I'm going to continue to reiterate that throughout this post. Hate will not stand. Darkness will not remain. Anyone who's thinking along that master race line, anyone who's thinking along that supremacy line, anyone that can be a part of the KKK, they are a dark individual. They are dark groups. They are dark, messed up people on the inside. They have twisted ideology, twisted beliefs, and they're trying to have others join them in that twisted beliefs. And there are some who do. They have their little sect that they've indoctrinated and continue to join their so-called cause. But in 2017, it's a different day. Now is the time for us all to speak up and speak out. This is the Marc Medley Show.